the side, there's racks and racks of candy magazines.
Yeah.
Where I got this, but there's like one of about 40.
You're gonna have about.
I'd like to introduce a gentleman that I ran into a few years ago, and he's best described as an idea hamster. You get him on his cage, get him rolling, and it's amazing. Let's have Bob Hettinga, please.
All right.
All right, Bob.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Is this working? Good. I'm not supposed to be able to hear the amplifier, I guess that's the deal. How many people already know what I'm going to talk about? That's what I was afraid of. First of all, I've been sort of put up here as a ceremonial cypherpunk, and I've only been on the list for a year and a half. And really, this particular rant is mostly about something about being lots of different places. I have the attention span of a gnat, and so I'm natural for the net. And I have done lots of different things, and I sort of saw a mapping from one place to another on the net, and it sort of got me excited, and I wrote stuff about it, and I've been in trouble for it ever since. So let me, first of all, I need to thank some people. I need to thank Jim Black, who's running the Cyberdog kitchen, who may not be here, and who actually got the ticket to me here, or at least the purchase order number. And Ford Johnson, who is a Cyberdog evangelist and has now gone into other things. And Cynthia Zwerling, who's done an enormous amount of the legwork, including getting the tickets to me and putting up the posters you saw and spreading the word and all of this stuff. And finally, Vinny Moscratolo, whose business card says DTS Sniper, 1 shot, 1 kill, and who proves once again that if you get a Marine motivated, that interesting things happen in a hurry. Okay, first of all, I'm going to give you a syllabus. There are 2 books that you should read if you probably, and you probably have already read them, but if you haven't, you should actually go get them. One of them is Words, and the book full of words is Out of Control by Kevin Kelly. And Kevin Kelly is one of Stuart Brand's boys, and is now sort of the head editor at Wired magazine, is sort of the principal spinner of Mind Candy. And the thing that got me interested in one of the primary concepts of this, digital cash and money on the net, came out of an article he wrote for the Whole Earth Review, which I somehow got Nexus an account for and found when I started getting interested in this. And through that article, I went and found the Cypherpunks group and sort of got and the rest is history, I guess. Kevin Kelly. And it's a book with a bunch of bees on the cover. And one of the most important concepts in that book, and this is why you should get it, is the idea of emergent systems. Things that start out with little chaotic blobs of code that interact chaotically with other pieces of code, and order emerges from that, among other things. But that's the idea that I got from that book, among other things. Discussions of how bees swarm and other things like that. And don't read it too hard, just read it fast. It's a nice light read, even if it's a big one. And that's a good book to do. The other one is Numbers, and that's Applied Cryptography by Bruce Schneier. This is effectively the first textbook on cryptography, only it's not really, nobody's teaching any courses, or maybe they are now, on it. Cryptography, they used to joke that cryptography, well, it wasn't a joke, it was a law, that cryptography was born secret. And Whit Diffie, the inventor of public key cryptography, changed that. And Bruce Schneier wrote the first authoritative text on cryptography. Sort of the whole title is Applied Cryptography, Algorithms, or Protocols, Algorithms, and Source Code in C. So you can see how useful the book is, and the new version has more source code in C. But it shows you how to implement a lot of the stuff that I'm going to talk about. Okay, let's talk a little bit about how we got where we are now. In the beginning, I think business was mostly done the way that I think the business is going to end up being done again. And that is that people basically shove tokens around at each other. People in a long time ago, back in Babylon somewhere, writing was basically invented to do business. And something most people never really want to admit, but it's basically what it was for. And more to the point, they wrote on pieces of clay, and they wrote on pieces of clay to account for, the things that they had to control, people in Babylon. And they invented this thing called money, and what money was originally was a token which said 3 cows on it, and then it might have been wrapped up in a little ball or something, so you didn't know what it was. It had a signature on it that said 3 cows, so say I, J. Nebuchadnezzar. And then they passed that around like money, and what happened was that if you broke the ball open, then you could claim the 3 cows from J. Nebuchadnezzar. So it was a promise to pay 3 cows. And that's really kind of where money comes from. Now, let's fast forward a little bit and talk about, and so what you get, most of business has basically been conducted that way pretty much the whole time. Double entry bookkeeping as a system wasn't really invented until the very late Middle Ages, and mostly actually about the time of the great princes of Italy, the Medicis and such. And mostly that was so that they could keep track they could actually monitor the operations of their business. These guys were basically gangsters, thieves, who basically used this so that they could tell when their bookkeepers were lying to them. And it was a neat trick thought up by a monk. And all the entire accounting methodology that we use now sort of came from that. So that's one thing. And basically a bookkeeping system is a giant hierarchy where you roll things up to the top. And at the bottom, at the top you say, I've got this much money left over, and that's a cash flow. And then you pass it on to whoever owns that hierarchy of book entries. Now, so that's sort of the first, not the first, but an imposition of hierarchy. And it made things really useful because, if somebody was lying to you, you could pretty much figure out in a hurry why and how and for how much they were stealing from you. And you could also measure your performance from year to year, and that was useful. So let's fast forward a little more. People started trading equities about the same time. People started trading pieces of paper, that said, I owe you this much, or if the king dies, I'll pay you this much, or if you lose your ship, this is Lloyd's, I'll pay you this much, that sort of stuff. And a bunch of guys in Wall Street got together under a buttonwood tree and started swapping paper securities. A bunch of guys in London a bunch of shopkeepers in London got together and started in the same neighborhood, started swapping securities around. But these were all certificate-based systems. And I'm using certificate here not in the same sense that you use, that people like to use certificates. So I'm sorry if I cause a little cognitive dissonance here, but you'll see why in just a minute. What changed all of this, people conglomerating in one place, was the advent of faster and faster communications. First it was based on transportation. You had fast horses or you had stagecoaches, which could haul mail around quickly. And then you had semaphores, and then you had the telegraph. But the problem was that switching in these networks were all people, and people were expensive. So what you ended up with were networks arranged on hierarchies. And these networks, they're all the things we know today. Distribution hierarchies, with a wholesaler. The market hierarchies, for instance, for stocks, you talk to a broker who passes it on up the chain. And of course, a classic example of this is a telephone hierarchy where you have a central office and then you have a local office. things get passed up and then back down the network. And this is all because people were the switches. Well, about 1920 or so, somebody did a study and figured out that you'd need every man, woman, and child, this is something we all know here, to switch every call, to switch calls pretty soon. And so people started looking at ways to automate switches, and we got electromechanical switches, the clicks you hear, and then we got electronic switches, tones, and then we got semiconductor switches, and then the world changed. Because what happened when that started to happen, when that started to happen was that you could switch, because the price of switches kept falling every 18 months, and now every year somebody's claimed to me, that you could switch a call not up the hierarchy and down the hierarchy to somebody, but straight through. You could get a permanent circuit and switch your own calls. When you take someone sends you a fax, and you say, ooh, that's cool, and you write on the fax, and you fax it to somebody else, you're effectively switching a bunch of information. When you download a bunch of email and forward it to somebody, which is what I do a lot these days, is...
You're one big switch, Bob.
That's me, a big switch. You get, I'm basically switching stuff from point A to point B. Well, so now we come to a guy named Peter Huber. Peter Huber has got more credentials than God. He's got a Harvard Law degree, and he's got a doctorate in mechanical engineering from MIT. Like the very bad joke about the Cambridge. Well, there's a joke. I'll tell you later sometime. Come ask me or send me email. But it's about people from both Harvard and MIT and how confused people can get trying to figure out who's from where. And Peter Huber got assigned or got the contract to evaluate the performance of the modified final judgment, which was the agreement, I guess you'd call it an agreement, that or the judgment. Let's call it a judgment and get it over with. That Judge Green put down to break up AT&T. 3 years after that, he commissioned Peter Huber to go say, okay, tell me what's going on here. What does the world look like now? Should we deregulate some more? Should we break up some more? What do we do? And he wrote something called the geodesic network. And Peter Huber's argument in that particular piece of government reporting, it's about that thick, and I think you can still get it from actually you can get it from Huber, and if you look at my web page, you can get it, you can go hit Huber's website and get it from him now. It basically said, deregulate them and let God sort them out. Because the prices of switches were falling. This is all Grove's Law, and you guys know all of this already. But what it allowed was this geodesic network, okay, where information came through a node, but it didn't matter which way information went. There was no up or down. It was arbitrary. There was no idea. The content of the node had nothing to do with its place in the architecture, I guess. The switches, the stuff you were switching. So that was why Peter Huber said, deregulate, turn them loose, let them go. Let the phone company get in the business of cross-referencing its yellow pages. Let the phone company allow you to redial off of the switch or take messages off of this. Things that were happening now. And more to the point, let everybody compete with everybody. Because there's, these economies of scale are sort of based on a model that doesn't work anymore, and that's that pyramid, that hierarchical switching model. Now, let's talk a little bit about the way the world works. I mean, think about the way everybody, your classic organizational structures. When they remap your department this week, what do they give you? They give you a pyramid, right? Sort of. I mean, I know they do I'm sure they do crosshatches and stuff. And dotted line reports and all that crazy stuff. But basically they point you to who's in charge of what. And it's all mapped to some hierarchy. Now I understand that human beings have lived and apes have lived in hierarchies all of their evolutionary existence. And of course we can see it in baboons and stuff. And and some people have more power, but maybe those power structures aren't necessarily hierarchical, and I won't argue about the social implications of all of that. But it is interesting to note that the internet is not hierarchical. It's a geodesic. It's, Gilmore likes to talk about the idea that censorship is damage and the net routes around it. And that's basically true about all kinds of things that the net may consider damage, including somebody standing in the middle of what could be a big data flow, trying to monitor it all, which we'll talk about soon, if not now. Yeah, I'm getting there. Okay, so one of the pictures in my head that sort of came out of all of this was that the switch, a semiconductor, is a surfactant. It's an information surfactant. It basically breaks up information into smaller pieces and moves it someplace. Kind of like when you drop, and when you've got something like Moore's Law happening, these switches get smaller and smaller and smaller in a sort of, in a fractal kind of way, and so the information gets busted up smaller and smaller in a fractal kind of way, kind of the same way that a surfactant works on your dishwasher water. You've seen the commercial, the Dawn commercial. Somebody puts a drop on the soap and the grease disappears. Well, that's kind of the way that I think about information and the way I think about this geodesic network stuff and about the falling price of semiconductors on information. By the way, this is not, none of this is mine, okay? This is all stuff everybody else is doing out there, and I'm just sort of talking about it. I'm kind of like the guy who's standing at an acute angle on a couple of hallways, that intersect at this acute angle, and I'm talking to the people on either side of the hallway, because I managed to wander out here first, and I'm telling people what I see. And, when they get here, I'll disappear. I'll be surfacted away. So I've been paying attention to this stuff, and one day I'm sitting. One day it was at Apple World in August. I'm sitting there, and I'm watching OpenDoc, and I look up between bites of my complimentary ham sandwich, and shortly after, a bunch of guys, the person demonstrated how you could flip one of these PCI Macs open, and it has a little foot to hold everything so that you could actually change the memory. Lots of stomping and applause from all the hardware guys for that one. And so the guy goes up and he does OpenDoc, and he drags out a part, and he throws a database part up there, and he throws a clock part, and you guys have seen all of this. And I go, that's geodesic software. What we're doing is breaking up these monolithic hierarchical applications into smaller and smaller bits. And it's probably fractal. In fact, that we'll be building smaller and smaller pieces of code as the ability to run that stuff inefficiently, as it is, increases. So I thought that was cool, and I walk over to Vinny, who's between episodes at the Ehrlich tobacconist in the cigar room. He's running the test room so people can see whether their code blows up on all the new Macs. And I say, blather, 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 geodesic blather, blather, OpenDoc blather. He says, Cyberdog. I go, Cyberdog? And, light breaks on Marblehead. And all sorts of cool things open up for me because I am currently hanging out on this group called Cypherpunks, where we are talking about things like the ability to buy and sell things with certificates anonymously and still have protocols that work, to buy and sell things in very, very small amounts and have protocols that work, to allow people to buy something from somebody and be assured that when the money changes hands, you don't have to worry about whether the money's going to bounce. And you don't need to talk to you don't need to be online linked to somebody to get that information to prove that it won't bounce. You can pretty much trust it. And i.e., when I buy something for $1 from Marshall, fat chance, 100 bucks for $100 for me. He will give it to me, and he'll take my money, he'll put it in his wallet, and he won't worry about whether the money's any good. Now, people did this with cash. People have done this with gold, all this sort of stuff. And the guy who's done it on the net is a guy named David Chaum, who's a very scary cryptographer from Berkeley who has invented the idea of blind signatures, which is basically kind of what a dollar bill is. It's a gigantic signature, an unforgeable signature on paper. And the way that a piece of digital cash works is that if I go to the bank and I say, give me a piece of digital cash, and I'll have my bank wire you some money to your account, then you'll hand me a record, which is a signature, which I can then pass to people, and they can pass to other people. And eventually, after all that happens, it goes back to the bank, and the bank says, yeah, that's ours. Here's your dollar. Without having to keep track of all those offsetting book entries that were invented back in the 15th century to keep people from stealing from each other. So then, basically, I wrote something about this. I put it on Apple Internet users. It was about 20K worth of rent. And then it got copied all over the place. And the next thing I know, I get a phone call or get email from InfoWorld, and I talk about this whole idea of the geodesic network and about OpenDoc and about Cyberdog and about geodesic software and all this stuff. And they say, hey, you want to, we want to cut this down a lot, and and put it on a page in InfoWorld. And I said, okay, how much? And they told me, and I said, fine. And this is the first words I ever got paid to write, which was rather cool, because I gave them away to begin with. So that's kind of how I got here. I feel like I wanted to have a picture of Admiral Stockdale here. Who am I? Why am I here? But let's talk a little bit about cypherpunks and who they are and what they do. Cypherpunks is an anarchy. It's a mailing list, that's all it is. There's nobody that speaks for them. It's a bunch of people there's about 1,000 or more now, who hang on to a mailing list and argue about cryptography for the most part. It's, well, not maybe the most part, but the consequences of cryptography, certainly. And it was started by Tim May and Eric Hughes, who isn't here, was going to be. I guess you have to hear me talk some more. God help you all. And they did this because, for a lot of things, mostly they were very interested in exactly the same kinds of stuff I was talking about, plus a few other things. In addition, the ability to anonymously send email, to send anonymous messages on the net, and for people to know you sent them using signatures and that sort of stuff. And it's all in applied cryptography, and if I try to explain it, I'd do it wrong and catch hell. But believe me, it's all there, and it can be done. And what this, the point is that it was it was a great place. I just had all of my, my entire worldview just sort of disappeared. It got surfacted away, if you will. And so there's a lot of things that, let's see, what else we got to do here? Okay, so one of the things that cypherpunks does is they talk about strong cryptography, which is the ability for me to encrypt something so that nobody can read it except the person I sent it to. And what they do, and that's a big problem for a lot of hierarchical entities like governments, who are trying very hard to control things and to make sure that order is maintained. And people like the 4 horsemen of the info clips, that is pedophiles. Oh, we have to. It changes once in a while, but right now it's pedophiles, terrorists, money launderers, which is important to a government because there's a joke on a mailing list I was on at Harvard which said, what happens when taxes become a tip? And who was, help me somebody, drug dealers. So, and I really wanted to have a picture of the Notre Dame Four Horsemen, you know, these four guys in football uniforms with leather helmets sitting on horses. That was taken. I think that would be either that or the ghosts in Pac-Man. Like then you could actually attach names to them. Somebody's got to tell me what the names of those ghosts were because I remember misspent. Yeah, see what I'm saying? We could just name them, you know, interchangeably and map the addresses away. Anyway, so now the other thing is that one of my first jobs out of college was in finance. I was a clerk at a place called Morgan Stanley, a place you guys probably know about since they did the IPO for this place. In fact, there's a story about the two Steves showing up in the Chicago office, and Kim Brooker, who is the managing director at Chicago, asked his secretary if she would call down to Brooks Brothers and get these gentlemen some shirts with buttons on them for the road show that they had to go to that afternoon. And one of the things that happens with digital cash is a bearer certificate. If I own, possession is 100% of the protocol, if you will, because there's no law, in digital cash. If I own the certificate, then I own the certificate. If I double spend the certificate and give it to two people at once, I can be identified, which is bad form if you're trying to rip people off. So what you get is possession isn't 100% of the law, and actually that's the way those certificates that were being traded under the buttonwood tree and down in the city of London were being held. You signed them over, or you didn't sign them over, you just handed them over in exchange for money. And basically if you had the certificate, you could vote the stock, and that was the end of it, or you had a claim on it. And actually, one of my first jobs at Morgan Stanley was getting rid of one of the last piles of bearer certificates, which stood about this high, and it was for Commonwealth Edison or something. And they were about this big by this big, and at the bottom was like, you know, those things you pull off in the laundromat that with someone's phone number on them? Those are called coupons. And so when somebody talks about the coupon on a bond, they're actually talking about a little piece of paper that used to be on the bottom of this, and you clipped coupons and sent them in, and they sent you back the interest because you had the coupon. Well, digital cash works the same way. Digital bearer certificates work the same way. You can create a bearer bond on the net with digital cash technology. That means, in fact, you can create digital bearer bonds, you can create digital stock certificates, you can actually do anonymous voting protocols, you can do, which means nobody knows who their shareholders are, but they know that their shareholders voted, and what the vote was. You can do, you know, and anything you want. If you can, and we're talking about this whole idea of surfacting structures away, like Fidelity, a company I've done some work for. Fidelity is the biggest mutual fund company in the world, and the reason they're so big is because they have these economies of scale. They have all these switches. They're called representatives, and they're people who answer the phone and switch what they hear on the phone into a computer, or they switch stuff from one computer to another. And basically, when you do something like the web with digital certificates, you can basically take the digital cash off your hard drive, hand it to the web page of the portfolio manager, who then can use that money to spend that digital cash to buy other stocks, and then he issues you a bearer certificate, which you use to claim back your cash at a higher, more cash later, as he has appreciated the value of his holdings. So you don't need all those people answering those phones, all those people coding those book entries in the machine. You just need some bearer certificates and a place to hold them securely, and that sort of stuff. I'm rounding the stretch here, guys. Which brings me back to Cyberdog. One of the things that I would really like to be able to do with Cyberdog is something that I see in my head a lot. it's not an acid flashback. It's dragging a coin from a digital cash, purse, if you will, or whatever, a wallet, onto a register in a web part of some kind, and paying for something. That's pretty simple to see. The technology is there. In fact, the bank is out there right now. It's called Mark Twain Bank, and they have issued digital cash certificates backed by dollar bills in the bank. And in fact, my web site will take them once we get things sort of settled down, so that to pay for subscriptions and other things going forward. It's sort of like Mr. Bill's idea of eating your own dog food. So anyway, you can do that sort of stuff now, and those are the kinds of things that I think are very important for something like Cyberdog to do, because basically the killer app, I'm going to say this and catch all hell for using all these trite phrases, but I think the killer app is commerce. More to the point, it's cash commerce, and nobody's really doing this yet. They're talking about it, and they're kind of, the Wright brothers have built the plane, and it flies, and yeah, the elevators are on the front of the plane instead of the back, and all sorts of other things are happening. But it's, it's there, and it just needs to be worked on, and it doesn't need to be worked on very much to do a lot of very amazing things. And mostly, what it needs to be done is that it needs to be sort of componentized, and so that other applications can spend money. And I'll get to that in just a second, and then I'll wrap up. And so that people can spend money on the net without having to go through a credit card and all the costs and overhead that entails, like Fidelity's big squad of people who have to manage all the book entries when all you need is hand somebody a certificate to pay for something, and that sort of stuff. Now, there are a lot of problems with this, and we'll talk about them because in question time I'm going to get hammered on all of this. But that's basically the sort of picture I have about this. And finally, let's sort of fast forward some more, right over the edge, and I get to predict things or not. But one of the things I think about is what happens when people's code starts sending them money in the mail. You write an OpenDoc part on the net, and it goes out like shareware, only this time you don't have to guilt somebody into paying you. It actually holds people up for some small amount of money, and then emails you the money, signed, with your signature or not. Actually, not signed, but signed over to you, emailed to you under a public key, so your public key, so nobody can read what it is anyway. And basically, if the code runs, it sends you money. If it doesn't run, it doesn't. It's sort of Darwinian that way. The people who write the new stuff make the money. The people who write the old stuff don't make the money. If somebody pirates your code, and this is a problem, well then they're going to have to. There's still second-order effect on you actually writing code, so it's not completely. It's not a total loss. And more to the point, you can create these sort of objects out there that are out of control, sending you money, which is kind of cool to think about. And more to the point, you figure out you've got a way to pay for things on the net. You've got an ecology of money, so to speak, out there. And that's pretty much the strange but true, or maybe not true, idea that I'm wrestling with these days. And that is actually, financial cryptography for dogs. That's having Cyberdog parts sending you money from the net. And I've written my last line because what we're doing is we're basically dissolving the entire status quo into a cloud of self-organized chaos. That's pretty much it. I mean, all our social structures are based on this hierarchy, and it's all sort of dissolving away. And I think there's a model out there, chaotic and emergent though it is, for what's happening next. And that's it. Okay. Thanks. This is the first time I've done this, so I'm having a lot of fun up here. Sweating enormously.
You credited all the ideas in your talk except at the very end the idea for charge-per-use software. And
I don't know where that comes from.
Pardon?
I don't know where that comes from.
That comes from papers by Mark Miller and Eric Drexler that were published in the Ecology of Computation.
Thank you. Right.
which is by Huberman, and I was actually going to recommend that as being a book that's up in that high class.
I'm just yammering up here. I'm a switch. I'm not actually adding anything except the switching.
What is the name? Is the the editor's name is Huberman.
Spell it.
Huberman.
Huberman.
And it's the ecology of computation.
The ecology of computation.
It's about agorical computing.
Agorical computing. And I've heard of this, but I haven't gone and read it. So that's probably why I'm not attributing anything to anybody.
I'm going to ask the naive question. Okay, so I get some e-money, and I duplicate it and spend it in 2 places, but it's
Right.
anonymous e-money, and the people who receive it duplicate it and spend it in 2 places, still anonymous e-money.
Okay.
How do you prevent
what
that?
What we're dealing with here, first of all, you're assuming that nobody will ever check the money. Okay? And certainly people will check the money. And the reason, and the trade-off for that is, some risk will reward thing, which will be figured out on actual data someday. Somebody will get maybe not a Nobel Prize, but who knows, for this sort of figuring out of why, at what point do people not check out their e-money online to see if it's real? Because effectively, the checking mechanism is this arbitrary ability to go out and go to the bank and say, hey, is this real? Has it been double spent or not? And not take it if you don't spend, just to taste. It's like biting the gold coin to see if it dents, So that's the, and the other thing is doing business and blowing a pseudonym, if you're using a pseudonym, which you then have to build, God help me, reputation capital for, to blow up a new one. And it's this whole certification hierarchy thing, which may not be a hierarchy, but it's people vouching for other. And basically, my favorite quote about this is from J.P. Morgan, or J. Pierpont Morgan, the original Morgan. And the Congress hauled him in about 1913 after he basically bailed the U.S. Treasury out of the fire 3 or 4 times and decided he owned the planet, and they wanted to rake him over the coals. And he was old and tired, and they got him in, and they put him down in front of him, and they asked him about how he could control something. He said, they asked him what the most important thing was in his business. He said, character. And they said, character? What about money? What about this? What about that? He said, no, character. If I didn't trust someone's character, I wouldn't buy anything from them if they offered me all the bonds in Christendom. Excuse me, that's politically incorrect, but basically that's what the man said, so we have to live with it. And he said so, there's that whole idea of reputations and stuff. And so, frankly, if I don't know you from Adam, I'm going to check your money. And there's nothing to keep me from checking your money, and I won't take your money if I can't check it. And if and if it's a nickel and dime transaction, well, fine. I believe that for very small transactions, and there's a lot of straw man about this. Nicholas Borenstein. Nathaniel, thank you, sorry. I just got thrashed by him yesterday. He says, he likes to posit this scary scenario where somebody steals the keys to Fort Knox, basically. That is, somebody gets a hold of the private key for the bank and then starts printing their own money. Okay? Well, okay, so, how many banks will there be? There won't be a bank. Second of all, if the bank goes under, well, some people get burned by it. And so finally, people guard keys. There is Fort Knox. Nobody's stolen gold from there. People will figure out the kinds of things necessary to prevent that from happening. If they haven't already, probably in some paper somewhere.
Okay, but the confusion there is, well, that kind of security is identification-based security. It's not anonymity-based security.
Well, okay, I just went and did this morning, and I got...
Well, in the online internet
Right.
protocols, you're already all online. So if someone pays you, you don't give them the product until you check the money. And if the money fails, you still don't know their identity, you just don't give them the product. So it's not identification-based, you still preserve the anonymity.
Actually, if 2 people spend the money, it is identification-based.
Please?
If you get 2 certificates that are trying to represent the same piece of money, you can, in a broad way, XOR them and find out from there the identity of the person who forged the money.
My favorite analogy for this is, suppose we were people were kiting checks, right, for money. And they were just signing, pay to the order of, pay to the order of, pay to the order of, and we're kiting checks, really. because it involved a bank account. But they were basically, people were signing over infinitely long endorsements on the back of checks. And so if you perfectly Xerox the check and then handed it over to two people, it would cross. And that's how you'd get identified. Now that's an analogy. That's not how the real protocol works, but that helps you think about it.
Also, there's some things like with digital anonymous credit that AT&T did, which actually has multiple banks, so that there can be one bank has your accounts and the other bank has your ID, your real, your true name, and those never meet. So that you can, right now you have to have your true name on your bank account at the bank.
Next.
Yep. What you're talking about is a different monetary system than, national currencies. And,
Yeah.
I expect that at some point we're going to have to start worrying about exchange rates.
I'll give you a big hint. I had lunch with the guys at State Street, currency traders at State Street Bank in Boston, the largest institutional trustee bank. They're the people who hold your money if you buy a bond, are responsible for paying you back too. And the currency markets are geodesic. There's no hierarchy to the currency markets. People trade, if you burn somebody in the currency markets, they'll never do business with you again. Game over. That's what happened to Bank of New England. That's what happened to Daiwa Bank. Sort of. Well, the Fed beat up on Daiwa. But I have problems with national, there's no need for centralized banking. You can have a currency board which basically gives you an index of other currencies to base your currency against. And that it works fine, and doesn't work very well in Argentina because they botched the index, but it works fine in places like Chile. And there's no reason why we can't do it.
Right, but I expect that there's going to be some kind of exchange rate between
Sure.
e-dollar or digital
Yes.
US dollars.
Right.
And there may end up being exchange rates between digicash that you get from different institutions.
Exactly.
So,
Fine.
No problem.
Arbitrage.
yeah.
Smoking.
So
You're next.
Kind of a related question. Is the government going to feel that they need to regulate this?
Well, I have two questions. One is, there's two ways. It's a horse race myself. It's a question of whether they can find out a lot about it. I'm waiting for somebody crazy in Vanuatu to put up a currency, based in dollars, basically. It probably gets shut out by the whole system. But in addition, there's that idea of what happens when taxes become tipped. What happens when they can't enforce it?
There's actually David Chom actually has been talking a lot lately about sort of the reverse for taxes. You can actually set it up such that you can give me a receipt as you're a charity. You can give me a receipt for that charity, and then I can give the government the certificate so that they can prove that I paid a charitable institution some money, but they can't know who it was that I paid the money to.
I love David Chom. Okay, more? Anybody else?
My question was similar, actually, to what was just asked. Has the government taken a position, because that could be considered a security in some respects, have they issued a position on how they handle this, since you said there is a bank currently issuing these things?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, the bank maps your true identity to a bank account and all that sort of stuff. And actually, I have a protocol and a scenario. It's not real. Where you can do that. You don't have the trustee, the holder of the money does not have to be the issuer of the digital cash. You can have a trustee bank like State Street and somebody else, an independent underwriter, underwriting digital cash. But yeah, right now what we have to settle for is the fact that at the exchange level, getting money off the net, somebody has to be identified. And that makes sense because you've got all of this book entry hierarchical stuff that depends on people knowing. It's called non-repudiation. You can't back out of a trade. In cryptographic protocols, non-repudiation means the trade doesn't happen because the money doesn't work. And that's replacing law with cryptography, which is something cyberpunks really like a lot.
How do we make the jump to light speed, essentially? It's great to say that, we get rid of government and all the hierarchy stuff, and I'm a firm believer in trying to get rid of people who are dead wood, but you have to, there's some way that you have to move off of your foundation and onto something of a totally different value system.
Mike,
Everything's still based
I
on
understand
money, so how do we...
I know what you're going to say. Let me finish the sentence. Sorry.
If you got the answer, I don't know.
Yeah, I think of two things. First of all, think about monarchies right now. They're mostly ceremonial, except in places where they aren't, but they're still around. Think about, so I think that we may go that way with a lot of government stuff. All right, on time. So I think that that's pretty much what's going to happen. They'll go the way of sports teams. We still have surface transportation, right? In fact, somebody's invented a better train once we figure out how to get decent magnetic levitation going. But we also have flight and we have cars, which are basically point-to-point sorts of transportation. And
but that still doesn't remove the dependency on an established institution, which is the United States government.
Fine. Go for it. Somebody else is helping.
I want to add that there is a lot of exchange that is going on now that we do not do. We do not refer to cash. As an example, right now there is on the internet I have a T1 line and I have other people that are exchanging bandwidth with me. I'm connecting to them because they're giving me another access to the net. I'm connecting to these guys to another access, and packets are being routed through me. There's an implicit trade of packets that is going on, of sharing of bandwidth. So there's no reason why we're just sort of brute forcing it, making guesses, and every 3 months we're sort of going, well, gosh, you owe me a lot more bandwidth. But down the line, we can actually turn this into a token, a bandwidth token that could be traded not for cash, not for anything else, but for my 2 seconds of T1 time.
Right. But this is different from a book entry funny money. I understand what you're saying about government.
You homogenized the issue. You said, okay, I can trade bandwidth for bandwidth.
Okay,
the glory of money is that it's a store of value.
Right.
So that I can trade my money for any, I can map it essentially.
I can
advance my money to any kind of point.
Before, I don't want to get into too much on this, but basically anybody can issue money as long as they pay it back. Okay? And so you end up with scenarios where people can issue money that, and basically current countries do it now, But in the old days, before we invented central banks, which was only 100 years ago, more or less, banks issued their own cash. And it worked pretty well. I mean, we didn't even have a national banking system, really, for 50 years. So, you got to remember, we got this emergent, control structures are usually emergent, and governments basically sit on top of those control structures and say that those control structures wouldn't exist if the government didn't. That's not necessarily true. Hi, this is an actual financial cryptographer. I call him that. He's famous. His name is Eric Hughes, and he's the canonical cypherpunk, and God knows what else. And this is the first time I've actually seen him face to face, and I actually talked to him on the phone the first time last week when I groveled in his general direction on the net, told him to get up here and help me with the hard stuff. Well, I managed to have done okay.
We've had hard stuff this morning.
Okay, so why don't you go ahead and...
I'll answer the question in the back there, because the question of... Can you turn down the volume? I'm experiencing large feedback.
Probably me too. I'll turn this on.
There's a knob on the side there.
Oh, well,
you're fine now.
Yeah, that's better. Anyway, you can always money is fungible, but moving money across issuance borders is in fact very expensive. And so wherever you can do local clearing and settlement, you want to do local clearing and settlement, minimize the interdomain transactions, because that's where you actually incur significant transaction costs. As soon as if you can do all the transactions within a single legal structure, for example, if you have one intermediary who's doing all the financial transactions, it's much lower cost than if you have to get even 2 intermediaries to cooperate to do anything. Okay, so some of the models some of these models for micropayments, I think, are a little certainly the trend is toward doing smaller and smaller transactions. As the technology becomes more efficient, you're more able to technically clear trades at smaller and smaller values. But the idea of doing micropayments everywhere, where you're clearing cross-transactional boundaries, cross international boundaries at sub-penny level, I think is insane. I don't think it'll ever happen that way. And, well, it may happen that way someday, but the real thing that happens is that the human labor input in terms of expertise and error resolution becomes much more expensive than the technology. And where previously the fixed costs of the computer equipment were really the governing cost of doing the transaction system, it's going to change to be the cost of the people who are running the thing. And that does not change with technology. Basically, people, if there are 5 billion people on the planet, people cost on the order of 1/5 billionth of the world economy. I mean, modulo inequities in income, which are large, but they don't give you the same kind of inequities, say, that computer technology gives you in terms of the cost performance from 1 year to 10 years later.
I'm sure that you have some good answers to this, but I would think that from the government perspective, they could see this technology, especially if it's someone forward-looking like Gordon Gingrich, for implementing a highly automated, pervasive, secure VAT.
Yeah. I've been pricing Caribbean underwater fiber.
That is a
You
problem.
too?
It's really quite inexpensive.
Right.
When the laws stop at the national borders.
I'll tell you, you
Laws
can
are different.
you can run a 12 fiber cable down to the Cayman Islands and run OC48 on one fiber, and you can deploy that for less than about $500 million. Now, those of you who know what infrastructure projects look like on paper know that a good freeway construction project will cost you $20 billion. And so if you can find a way to finance that kind of fiber deployment, you very quickly get the ability to do regulatory arbitrage across national borders for financial transactions in a way that has FinCEN wetting their pants, I'm sure. How many of you know what FinCEN is? Raise your hands. FinCEN is the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, and it is the single closest thing we have to a big brother bureaucracy in the United States right now. They are probably the largest sink of financial data ever created. Every bit of financial data they can collect. And since they are a child of the Department of Treasury, they have regulatory authority to mandate disclosure of certain kinds of transactions. Ends up in their computers for analysis. They're trying to get a hold of real-time ATM transactions, and they can't get the real-time yet. That may happen within a few years.
That sort of runs into my idea of the node choking on all the information, which may or
No, it's not a question of technology. It's a question of whether they can convince all the banks to feed them the data. The banks are quite willing to feed them the data, assuming they can, one, get paid for it, and two, can do it technically.
We don't always do that.
I'm told that the Visa type people don't have to report to them. Is that still true?
Yes and no. I mean, it's like, anybody know what an administrative subpoena is? Raise your hands if you know what an administrative subpoena is. Okay, it's not widely known. It's a piece of paper on FBI letterhead that says, please give us some data.
I was told that Visa was given one of those once, and
they have rejected them on certain occasions, and they've complied with them on other occasions. For example, the government of South Korea told Visa that they had to turn over transaction tapes for all South Korean transactions for the last however many years and do it on an ongoing basis, or be shut out of operations in Korea entirely, and they complied. Now, you should know about Korea. Korea also recently passed what's called I've forgotten the actual term. It's essentially an open books law requiring disclosure of financial assets. It used to be you could open up an account in South Korea under any name you cared to and keep arbitrarily large amounts of money there. And the effect on government corruption was so deleterious that they decided to remove that provision. So there was a big bang.
See, if you build a system where that's not possible, or more to the point, if a system like that is not possible because it's cheaper to do it that way, like you get with bearer certificates and autonomous agents and all that sort of stuff, then then you don't have all these built-in audit trails to follow the money with. Now, obviously, you can burn down audit trails and you can shell corporations and you do all that stuff that tax lawyers do. But, you know, I mean, if it's not possible to do it and it's cheaper, then that's true. And basically, Eric just got through slamming me here, telling me, of course, that it's fuzzy-headed thinking to think that we could go down microtransactions with any real...
Well, no, certain kinds of microtransactions are going to exist, but I suspect they'll exist within a single transaction framework.
Yeah, okay.
So, for example, the people at General Magic could run a General Magic money system entirely within their little scheme and clear and settle it all within there, and then only do large transactions to the outer world, and that would work reasonably well. And
well, that's kind of what happens with digital cash anyway. If you're doing a bunch of anonymous transactions on the net with small stuff and then accreting them and sending them out to the real banking system through some sort of gate, then you get the same sort of...
Yeah, you get the same sort of effect. Steve?
Would you say something about the idea of loyalty to currencies? Do you think people will say have a loyalty maybe the way they do to a frequent flyer plan that's associated with a lot of other businesses besides the airline?
You know why frequent flyer plans create loyalty is because they're non-transferable. Well, hold on, that's really important because since they're not fungible, they can create loyalty. Currencies, by their essential nature, exist to be traded in foreign exchange markets. And so,
but do you think there'll be a loyalty to digital currencies?
There's loyalty to the U.S. dollar because the U.S. dollar pays up. Okay, that's exactly how anybody who issues digital cash.
Yeah, let's make this very specific. How many people have loyalty to the peso?
Which one?
The Mexican peso. Loyalty to the Mexican peso. Now, when you put it in that phrase, you immediately see that there are some difficulties associated with the idea of loyalty that's not based on purely fiscal considerations.
Yeah.
This all gets back to what backs the money, right? In other words, paper money is simply a level of indirection, you know, for some gold.
3 cows, so say I, J. Nebuchadnezzar.
Right, so this electronic stuff is just one more level of
exactly.
Let me further that. It's important to recall that digital money things are transfer systems and not stores of value systems. They only can move things around between individuals. They don't actually create the store of value. Now, that's...
Either does a paper, either does a piece of paper.
That's right. In fact, money, dollar bills actually are not so much a store of value as a means of transfer. However, that should be qualified, is that there is storage of value. There's effective storage of value when you have a real store of value and float in the transaction system. Okay. In other words, the float in the transaction system lifts off the store of value into making the transaction of value have some storage capacity. Okay, but it's really that time differential between the two legs which creates the storage capacity, and it's only as good as the underlying one. So there's a whole. I just should mention. I don't know if you know about this, but I've been developing cryptographic protocols to do auditing of money in stasis rather than money in motion, like digital cash is.
Are these your public books or?
Yeah, the open book stuff. Probably not. Anyway,
tell them about it, please.
Yeah, one of the things I've been conceptually working on are ways of creating synthetic currencies, and there's 2 aspects to that. One, there's the idea of the registry. You have an effective M0 in a synthetic currency, and there's the financial considerations of how you actually do that. If any of you have ever read economics papers on market baskets of currencies, which is a synthetic kind of currency.
I just did that last week.
Yeah. Well,
I'm pulling her.
At some point in the past, some of you have looked at some of these things. That's a reasonably general statement.
Is that like an index fund, only with currencies?
Yes, exactly.
Yes, that's what.
It's a mutual fund, or basically it's anything
currency
where
board does this.
A currency, well,
kind of.
Yes, but yes, in a different kind of way.
Sorry, guys.
In any case, there's all these places where you take one kind of money and turn it into another kind of money. Okay. You need a financial way of doing that. And in fact, what's happened is that people who are doing, these are derivative assets. People who are making derivative assets are trying to increase their fees on the things rather than create a transaction system. So one of the tricks is to figure out, see, government currencies, you've got to remember, are subsidized. And not so much, the dollar is a subsidy to the economy. And to date, it's an extremely successful one, and one that no one really in their right mind would want to get rid of for libertarian purity. Okay, simply because it works so well. Now, with increased ability to do electronic transactions, we may find that 20, 30, 50 years down the line that we're able to create synthetic instruments that work better than what the national currencies can do. And the environment that will come out of, by definition, is the place where you don't have a national currency regime. It'll be an international trade. So, people who want to think about how to get rid of government currency should start thinking about currency-like instruments that mediate international trade in good ways.
Could you talk? Why don't you talk a little bit about the market for anonymity? I mean, I believe that the blind transactions, by their nature are anonymous. However, the infrastructure that you exchange them over right now is not anonymous. If I click on something on a web server and I want to look at another page, the connection is two-way. I connect to it, then it connects back to me, and knows exactly who I am. Right. So doing a transaction over the internet is not anonymous right now.
Right.
So I imagine there will be a market for that.
How many of you have used anonymous remailers? Ever sent anonymous mail? So you can make an anonymizing web proxy with basic structurally exactly the same. It's real time rather than batch. That's the main.
Right, but that kind of infrastructure is going to have to be there for the anonymity part of the anonymous transaction.
Hey, one other thing. Let me talk a
No,
little bit about.
let me. Because you can do that. You can do that right now. And really, the only limitation is one of billable high bandwidth. I mean, that's really the only reason why you don't have. Samir will answer this question because I think he's planning to do this.
Yeah, just wait till the middle of a few months from now, the middle of next year, and we'll have anonymous encrypting web proxies.
So the thing is, there will be. I mean,
it's just a rough estimate, but sometime next year.
Yeah, structurally, there's several ways to price the bandwidth. You can do it by bit, or you can create a cooperative of 100 people which buys a certain amount of bandwidth, and they figure out a way to share it and allocate it. Any number of financial mechanisms can be used to make sure that money moves from the people who are using it to the people who are providing it.
I need to say something Apple related here. One of the things that got Ford Johnson interested in talking to me was his idea of, that these big servers out there there's no reason why they can't be just scaled down to the point where everything's point to point, just like Apple Talk is. And so that, people do actually serve information off of their own machines and, do run mailing lists off their own machines or whatever. And certainly, when you run into that kind of thing, you end up with every person a remailer, which is something that Tim May likes to talk about.
Yeah, let me address the market to anonymity, because there are two other aspects which are important. One is there are different kinds of anonymity. Okay. You have, roughly speaking, casual anonymity, which none of you in the room could do anything about, but the sysops could, or the NSA could, or someone with means could. And the second thing is there's anonymity, which is good against national governments and national technical means. Those are kind of the two poles of the technical provision of anonymity. You should just all expect that both of those will be available, and one will cost more than the other. Okay, now
there are also lower forms because you can have pseudo-anonymity in which you say it's only good for a year. You're only anonymous for a year.
Yeah, that would be a characteristic on a different scale. A question of the timeliness of the information. So, yeah, that would be another property of these kinds of things. The other thing that's very important about the structure of the market in anonymity is what the purpose of the anonymity is. Okay, roughly speaking, I see only two poles in it. One is I want to be left alone, which is a sort of general idea that I don't want people to know this information about me, lacking any specific reason, but knowing that the risk of arbitrary knowledge projected into an uncertain future is dangerous. Okay. There's a reasonable reason to do that. The second thing is illegal activity. Okay. Again, there's a difference in cost. Money laundering costs about 15 to 25% of revenue. It's a nice figure to know if you're
money.
If any of you are considering intermediating that market, that's how much. That's the figure you need to compete against. On the other hand, No. One of the secrets
I
of
wouldn't
learning how to
recommend
think,
it, mind you, but it can be done.
one of the secrets of learning how to think about this usefully is to not be afraid of illegal activity as a business proposition that you will never participate in. But the viewpoint of being able to analyze of that gives rise to an analytical framework which is much freer in your own thought. I assure you, so many things are clarified when you allow yourself to think like an illegal operative. The other poll, the want to be left alone poll competes against advertising. And in particular, whatever the characteristic percentage of revenue people are spending on advertising is what the user will have to replace in revenue to the intermediary in order to basically buy out the advertising revenue. And those are only rough estimates, but nevertheless, those two things, the 15 to 25% of money laundering and the 3 to 7% advertising, give you fairly good ideas of what the actual, where the actual market optima are going to be at. I think you'll have anonymity available at both those price points de facto in the market. It may not be single products that have those percentages, but that's where I think you've had your hand up first.
Yeah, I was hoping you guys could talk a little bit more about products, specifically things that you'll be doing.
Products?
I can't. That's the short answer. You'll have announcements next year.
No, I mean things that Apple should be doing.
Oh, things that Apple should be doing. I thought you were saying things that we were doing.
I have a laundry list of OpenDoc parts that I'd like to talk about, I guess, Cyberdog parts.
I'll talk about a few of them. The first thing is, in terms of very practical things, is to get another signature thing deployed in the operating system. The existing RSA signature method that's in there needs to be not so much replaced as supplemented. Okay, so that's happening.
What's your list of requirements for replacement for RSA signature?
Oh, I see. It's stamped confidential.
It's consensual.
Yeah, well.
But it's not anonymous.
Just cross that part out. It's okay.
It's consensus.
Eric, what are your requirements for a replacement RSA module?
This is from consensus. So this is still RSA. It's just better.
Yeah. Don't worry. It's only 2 more years, and then we can do other things.
It'll happen sooner. RSA's in the middle of suing Scilink and Stanford over. No, actually, I can't really talk about the details.
Anyway.
I know some of the patent attorneys who are doing this, but I expect the Stanford patents to fall in '96, and in fact, other algorithms be able to be used. So one of the things to do is there's a question in certification hierarchies: who's the root? And the final answer, the policy answer, which everyone should know, is that you're your own root of whatever nature. And being your own root, to date, has usually meant that you simply participate in the existing X509 infrastructure and label yourself as root. More broadly, that would mean not only choosing the particular algorithm, the particular CAs you accept, but also which algorithm types and certification structures you're accepting. Matt Blaze at Bell Labs is in the middle of releasing something called Policymaker, which does exactly that, and in fact, it takes arbitrary cryptography. That code is expected to be released for free commercial use. Okay. So I would recommend whoever's in charge of this to call Matt, have him send you the Policymaker draft. He's got a draft of this, and look into integrating that in at the OS level. That will allow. Policymaker is very, very good work. It basically allows the user to any user to set the policies of the cryptographic authentications he's willing to accept, and it's completely structured to allow certification authorities by creating a policy that you believe someone else. MAB at crypto.com or at research.att.com, either one.
Anybody on any of Apple's operating systems, the Newton operating system would also benefit from that sort of thing, because eventually you want to be able to spend your money where you are rather than back at your desk.
Right.
If you want electronic money to become more...
We have 3 minutes, so we can start to talk about closing it down. Then you can just mob Aaron.
All right. Question and then Jane. We'll take 2 more.
I was wondering if either of you could comment on the recent stuff that was happening at Netscape with GAC.
I visited my first Netscape disabled page 3 days ago.
I mean,
One of the
yours is kind of disabled. You know.
This was a guy who had previously disabled it, so he had it all working. He did 2 tricks. Both. I'll tell you the details and then I'll tell you the general. It's beautiful. The first thing he did is he used Netscape's color extensions to set black typeface on black background. If you didn't use that Netscape extension, you could read the page. The second thing he did is he used the Netscape extension meta-equiv what that does is you take one page and then you are immediately moved without your wish onto another page. And so you saw a blank screen for 5 seconds, and then before the confusion has a time to fully set in, you see this page has been Netscape disabled. Okay, now the generality of it is that you will always be able to do this given Netscape's strategy, which is don't believe them that they are trying to be standard HTML. They are trying to create something which is sort of HTML, but has all these extra things that are going to be used for product differentiation. Netscape's model can't work without product differentiation, and they are committed to dinking HTML in order to differentiate, which means you're always going to find something that's differentiated that you can detect Netscape with. Okay, likewise for anybody in the web who is going to follow some non-standard thing. Okay, but your question about GAC was, the policy is, I actually was reading Cyberpunks about this issue, which I haven't been doing lately, but I read about this. And I tell you, Netscape is sounding more and more like the Justice Department in their mealy-mouthed ways that they're talking about it. Now that's merely my impression, is that they say that, oh, it's not so bad. We really don't mean that.
What are we talking about?
We're talking. Oh, I'm sorry.
GAC.
Government
access to keys.
What is it?
GAC, government access to keys, which is a much better. Key escrow is not escrow. How many of you have ever gone through escrow? Quite a lot of you here, I know. Does key escrow resemble anything resembling escrow? No. You didn't choose the government. You didn't voluntarily give them your keys. You don't have. It doesn't ever leave escrow.
There's no benefit to you.
There's no benefit to you. I mean,
They aren't a trusted third party.
They are. They are.
They're not a trusted third party.
They're not a trusted third party. There's all these characters. Anyway, escrow is an abusive language. So the thing on the cypherpunks list, which has arisen as the thing people are using, is Carl Ellison invented, is GAC, government access to keys, which sounds, which is both a good acronym and something sounds like Nickelodeon would do.
By the way, the answer is that the Cyberdog, the Cyberdog HTML browser works just fine. How's that?
Yeah.
And it doesn't have GAC.
For those of you who don't know what
happened,
Jim Clark gave a lecture at a trade show where he was quoted in the press as saying that governments will have a need for this in order to create law enforcement, and therefore we find it inevitable that we're going to have to implement it. Okay.
I also know it came to a great surprise to a number of the crypto people at Netscape.
Yeah,
so,
that's right.
It's like,
anyway,
one more question.
The story. I'm going to table this by saying that Netscape's behavior in the this has all taken place since last Friday, so it's 5 days old. They haven't had time for a corporate retraction of any sort. One may or may not be forthcoming. We'll know whether or not they have a policy will be much better known in a month. Jamie had the last question.
I have a question about in the crypto anarchy domain, and that's the use of eCash as a hard currency for storing wealth in unstable environments.
Mm-hmm. What's your question about it?
Someday.
That's the answer. Okay.
You mean, can you use eCash stuffed in a mattress?
Do you see that happening in politically unstable environments?
There's not really a question about eCash, it's a question about finance generally. When Brazil was undergoing hyperinflation, that's exactly what happened. It had nothing to do with eCash. What was happening is that the banks of Brazil were selling to the upper class of Brazil they were indexed financial products based on the Brazilian currency. What does that mean? Basically, they made financial products, synthetic products, which were denominated in the Brazilian currency, which tracked inflation. Okay, now your question is, how do you track inflation if it's denominated in the Brazilian currency, which is inflating like mad? The secret is, of course, you don't hold Brazilian currency of any form. So what these were, basically, they were dollar accounts, which were denominated in the Brazilian currency. I forget the name of it. They were denominated in Brazilian currency, and basically they did foreign exchange trades in real time when people wanted actual working cash to operate in the Brazilian economy. Okay, and I don't think they were that particularly simple, but they were essentially that. And to answer your question, this is something I addressed in a different context before, which is that what you've got here is you've got float. Okay, and as long as you have an underlying store of value, which is sturdy, you can leverage that value into a store of value in the float of a digital cash certificate. So yes, you can store value in digital cash certificates, but you have to make sure your underlying underwriter is solvent and robust.
So keep your money one-to-one in something else.
And as soon as it becomes insolvent, your e-cash is useless.
See you later.
That's right, because
Confederate money.
Exactly.
Astrals, right?
So in fact, what may happen, and this is a fact not so much of the transaction mechanism, e-cash in this case, but an increased networking in financial areas, which is people will flee out of native currencies much more easily than they do now. Okay, which will put pressure on the issuers of national currency to have
real currency.
Well, no. In particular, prudent governments. Okay, this is
right.
Local foreign exchange is going to be even a bigger check on government power to dink with their budget and to overspend on social programs like many European countries.
Like Chile and not like Argentina.
Or like Mexico.
Yeah.
No, the worst example, believe it or not, is Italy. Italy's public debt measured as a percentage of GNP is like 150%.
Okay.
Much worse than the U.S. And believe it or not, the second worst in Europe is Belgium.
Belgium, yes.
So what I meant about Mexico was this, earlier this year there was a massive fleeing of foreign capital.
Right. Which was not, well, okay.
Okay, game over, man. Thank you very, very much.